Hi everyone, the state of here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Uncommon NASA album, Written at Night. This is the latest full-length LP from New York rapper and producer Uncommon NASA. This is his fourth studio album under this name, and it is the first album where I guess he's produced the entire thing himself, which is exciting to hear. I do love NASA's very clunky, noisy, textured beat production. Instrumentals that sound like they've been fermented in the cluttered and gritty New York underground that he comes from, which he took a break from on his last record, Halfway, featuring instrumentals from Black Tokyo all over that project, which were kind of skeletal, kind of dark, underwhelmed me a little bit, but I understood how they were supporting the theme of the record, the existential obsession with middle age and death. And while Written at Night is nowhere near as morbid, it's still a very dark project. I guess because we live in very dark times. The concept is literally centered around being written or being created at night. Uncommon NASA putting marker to paper in the wee hours, taking direct inspiration from these feelings of isolation, of paranoia, being tired, jaded, but also creative. And this album in a lot of ways is deeply political too. It's almost like NASA is writing this as a response to being kept awake at night because of I guess the insanity of our current political state. As if that's just kind of intensifying these negative feelings and giving him insomnia or something. And the instrumentals, while they do kind of have this somewhat muddy and lo-fi, like dirty old hip-hop underground cassette tape from 1995 aesthetic to them, they're also very spacious and dark and occasionally dreamy. There are even moments on this thing that I would call frightening or eerie or surreal. There's a strong feeling of alienation on this album too, which essentially kicks the entire record off with the song Grown Apart, with lyrics about friends dominating your time in like a really selfish or an inconvenient way. Uncommon NASA continuing with these themes of kind of being a self-admitted curmudgeon. Of course, he raps this over these very loose guitar chords and drum fills. It's very dramatic, it's very expressive, and of course he continues with his idiosyncratic rap style, which borders on like spoken word and slam poetry. Now the following tracks continue to deliver just these very moody and very introspective thoughts. The song Compass is all about the long roads that one might need to take in this journey we call life, all leading back home, bringing us back to our roots, our family, our loved ones. This is something that also guest rapper on the track Guilty Simpson emphasizes with his verse, talking about being like this nomadic dude on tour performing. And the beat features all these scattered drums, a couple of heavy and sour organ chords caked in grime. Meanwhile, the song Extra Lives contrasts that with a very fluid and a very hypnotic beat, and these watery, cycling synths that almost create like this hip-hop dream state. And the lyrical angle of the track is interesting too, NASA rapping about essentially the potential of everything he's worked for, everything he loves kind of being torn away from him. The track is essentially about fears, shortcomings, insecurities. Open Mike Eagle is a guest rapper on the track and enhances those themes with his verse talking about his fear of police or his inadequacies, talking about how the place where he lives isn't quite as nice as a lot of his friends, the self-doubt he deals with as an artist. And the hook on this thing is so sharp and refers very smartly, I think, to computer technology, with Uncommon NASA saying, "Don't attack us, create a backup," like I guess creating a backup for all the things that you don't want to lose. I think Barry McLean's vocals on the track are just a little loud, like they're not smoothed into the beat as much as they could be. However, in a sense, this does sort of add to the rough, weird, and somewhat lo-fi aesthetic that Uncommon NASA is known for. The track also kind of fills itself with more weird and strange noises, some of which are like these very textured pieces of like 8-bit percussion, like very crunchy, very brittle. But moving on to the next track, Small Change, which in my opinion is a perfect sentiment given just how little progress politically and societally I think we made over the past 8 years and how quickly a lot of that stuff is being undone now given the current administration. The track is titled Small Change, and it's about just change being small, being insignificant. So little progress, it's almost like there's no progress. And all over this cut, you have a series of rappers hailing from the UK, which is fantastic to me, especially given how good some of them are, especially King Kashmir of Strange You is on this thing. He has a hilarious line on this thing where he's rapping about reacting to a really inspirational Facebook post that this is gonna change the world. But then he sort of steps on that possibility by just, saying no and rejecting that. Between the guest verses on this thing, Uncommon NASA's verse on this thing, the whole track adds up into this idea that humanity, as much as they like to be inspired, as much as they want to see good things happening and change happen, they lack the inherent ability or are unwilling to do the work internally that needs to be done in order to actually make that change commence. There's also a very clinky and bubbly synth line on this thing, more 8-bit sounds I'm catching here, which I think are fantastic, like texturally so good. And then you have the very chilling song God's Aim, which instrumentally doesn't just sound like a dream, it sounds kind of like a nightmare. It's like this introspective rap anthem with Uncommon NASA rapping about how your plans and God's plans may not necessarily line up sometimes. And the way he puts it poetically, he's really truly on some Twilight Zone shit. And the album gets even more nightmarish from here. Now keep in mind, there are numerous tracks in the track listing where you have tagged onto the track title a mention of what time it's supposed to be. Midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And the deeper into these wee hours you get, the darker and more tortured almost the album gets. You have The Patient, which to me lyrically is another incredibly smart angle on the album. The track is essentially about the insanity of the modern day, or as NASA puts it, the mainstreaming of disgusting. And it's essentially about being told, hey, this is all normal, this is all okay, or, nothing crazy is happening now. So what ends up happening to NASA and his guest features on this thing is that they kind of internalize that insanity and then end up feeling crazy themselves, as if their reactions, their legitimate reactions to how off the rails things are becoming, are illegitimate. The way that they kind of frame it is as if they are mental patients being thrown into the loony bin when there's really actually nothing wrong with them. And again, this is another moment on the record where I'm just really impressed with how much the guests add to a particular story or a narrative on a track. Uncommon NASA does something on this record that I feel like a lot of rappers and a lot of artists don't do well enough when they bring guests on their records, and that's bring a certain level of expectation. That's bring an idea, a concept that they want this person to stick or adhere to in a very clear and in a very direct fashion. It's almost like this album is a movie and he's kind of just playing director. Now, I'm not entirely crazy about the beat on this track. There are some sinister qualities to it that I think are very enjoyable, but there's an incredibly loud and farty bass line to it that's very incessant, very repetitive, that I think kind of distracts a little bit. But still, I am so heavily impressed with the sense of collaboration on this track that it doesn't really take away from it for me, especially given just how intense some of the vocal performances are. Then there's the very twisted Looking Back, whose powerfully dark instrumental plays very nicely off of the southern twang radiating off of the opening rap feature on this track from Skip Coon. The song overall kind of being about losing touch with your own past or your past self. Now from here, the album seems to get a little edgier, not just simply darker, on the song Black Hole, where you have this revving, cycling bass, which in a sense is almost like dubstep-ish. The instrumental and the guest feature here is just super gruff. To me, it reads a little bit like it's trying too hard to be dark and angry. Like its attempts at sounding evil are coming off kind of cartoonish and somewhat silly. But that's also the vibe I catch on the following track, Gingerbread Hag, which at this point it just seems super intentional to me. Where not only you have this really raspy animated rap verse from Brzezowski, but also this schmaltzy walking jazz bass line and these like wailing guitars that are super distorted and this very kooky, silly and somewhat sour lead melody. It's also like a little devilish. It's very Tom Waitsian. Like it sounds like it's a sample of a Tom Waits track or something, or trying to sound like a Tom Waits song. Although I've heard the man's entire discography, so if this was a Tom Waits sample, it would reveal itself to me which one it was, but and also NASA's vocals on here in the chorus and the mantra of being consumed on this thing is just so shouted and so insane and so over the top. Things on this record are kind of just getting more out of control. Now, while it was a little rough getting to this heightened intensity point, I still do like the fact that the album, across its track listing, does have a really interesting emotional and sonic progression to it. It has a great flow. And this noisy and aggressive and jazzy peak creates a nice sort of space for a calm after the storm for the final title track on here, which I have to add has an amazing choice for features, Quali Chris and Billy Woods, both of whom have very distinct voices, very distinct rap styles that I think play against this type of theme, this type of sound, this type of concept very nicely, especially toward the end of Quali Chris's verse, who has the final verse on this entire record, and his words really kind of tie up the entire theme and concept of this album very nicely. As far as things that I think took away from this album, there were a few beats that I thought were a little annoying or didn't really work or gel for me, and maybe you could throw the idea out there that there are too many features on this thing, because there are a lot of features. Because going into this record, I guess I was expecting to hear a little bit more Uncommon NASA, given that the album is titled after him. However, even on the moments when he's not rapping, you can tell and sort of see very obviously that he is influencing the thematic and the conceptual undercurrent of every single verse and every single track here. Since it's very clear that he talked with his guests on this thing and gave them an idea of what direction to take their lyrics in because of what the song is about. I think maybe the album took a little bit time to really truly get going. Like, I felt that there were moments of Speak Your Truth that were a little underwhelming, and that maybe the album could have used like a bit of an epilogue from NASA to really kind of bring the whole idea of the album home. But outside of that, I mean, this record was really well produced, well performed, well cast. The concept is really well executed, and this whole thing just kind of goes to show why Uncommon NASA is one of the more unique rappers out there right now. This thing is also a pretty punchy 44 minutes. NASA does a lot in a very short period of time on this record. I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't die, you know. Just eat your fruits and veggies and stay hydrated, okay? Over here next to my head is another Uncommon NASA review. Also the link to subscribe to the channel. You're the best. You're the best. You're the best. Love you. Love you. Love you guys. Yeah, that's it. See you in the next one. Uncommon NASA, written at night forever.